Welcome back to Untaming Masculinity, the podcast where we tackle issues relevant to men and their journeys to reclaim their masculinity. I'm Dan, and as always, I'm joined by my good friend Brad. What's going on today?
Not much, man. It's just COVID's rampaging through my house right now, so that's fun. It's 4th of July weekend, and here I am sequestered in my basement. But doing all right. How about you?
Pretty good. You know, it's like you said, it's 4th of July weekend, so it's a nice long weekend. We just finished our fiscal year at work, and we were actually able to get everyone out around noon on Friday. So it's been an extra long weekend for us.
Nice.
Good times here. You know, we mentioned it's 4th of July, which means that it's coming up on the East Coast here. It's coming up on hurricane season. And it got me to thinking about preparedness. So every year, for those of you who don't live out here, every year those of us on the East Coast, around, I don't know, end of July, August, September, October timeframe, we worry about hurricanes coming up the coast. Everyone knows that they hit Florida and Louisiana and Houston. What they may not know is they also travel up and hit the Carolinas and New York, where I'm at, Long Island, and even up into Massachusetts, where I grew up. We were hit by a couple of big ones when I was a kid. It's something that we're always mindful of. Typically, they are not as destructive as, say, a tornado in terms of just completely demolishing homes, but they wreak a lot of damage, and moreover, they knock out utilities for a long time. I can remember when my kids were very little, we experienced Hurricane Sandy here, and I had twin 3-year-olds maybe, and we didn't have power for 12 to 14 days.
Was it that long?
Yeah, for my house in particular, yeah. And we also got a nor'easter in the middle of that, which dumped about 8 inches of snow. No heat, no hot water, because we don't have gas in our house. We have, everything's electric or oil. So it was fun. So we prepare for those types of things. And I know that we can get into it a little bit later, but I know you've got a certain mindset around it as well. And I figured it was a good time of year where we start talking about it and kind of introduce the guys to what preparedness is, what that looks like, or what that might look like for them, what it looks like for us, go through maybe some tips on how to help them get started if they feel like they're not prepared, and just talk about the topic in general, because it's important. You can sit there and live a happy life, but if you're not ready for those bad times, then it's going to come and get you.
Yeah.
The word preparedness means a state of readiness, which is interesting to me when I looked up the definition, because the thought of hurricanes is what initially got me going. But you can have a state of preparedness or a state of readiness for just about any situation in life, and that leads well into why do we prepare. So I'm going to kick it over to you, and I want to get your thoughts a little bit on the topic of preparedness, and also what you necessarily have prepared for in the future.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So just like you said, preparedness is a state of readiness. And the way that I look at it is, if the grid goes down, are you prepared to handle what comes next? If the electrical grid goes down, if stores get overrun, we've got all this talk of food shortages that people are throwing out there. You think of how, we could just look back at the beginning of COVID. Remember the toilet paper shortages and
Yeah, that's right.
Created hysteria around that.
Yeah.
The people who were prepared don't have to worry about those things. Like you said, if your power goes down for 10 to 12 days, what are you going to do? So it's just a matter of taking care and making sure that your home is in order, regardless of what circumstances come your way. We live in a society that is incredibly dependent on others. We rely heavily on the grid. You've got to think most families don't have more than probably a week's worth of actual legitimate food storage within their homes. So they're very reliant on supermarkets. What happens if some event comes up, supermarkets get raided? Times get tough. You think of individuals who are so reliant on the electrical grid. If the power goes down, you're not able to keep your home warm, or in other words, you might not be able to keep your home cool if it's in the middle of the summer. And those things can put your family and yourself in a very precarious situation. If you don't have the means to be able to take care of your family in an emergency, the consequences, we're not catastrophizing here. The consequences can be life or death. If you think about it, you had twin 3-year-olds, you didn't have power for 12 days. If you weren't prepared for that at all, what could have happened to your daughters? So to me, preparedness is simply just a willingness, a readiness to be prepared, to be ready for whatever comes your way so that you and your family can handle it. If the power were to go down for 2 weeks, all right, we got this. It'll be uncomfortable, but we've got it. That's food. That's water. It's provisions. That can also be things as simple as entertainment. Trying to entertain a 3-year-old for 2 weeks, if the power were to go down, can get a little tricky. So that, to me, in a nutshell, is preparedness.
I think that's absolutely right. There's a lot that is true in what you're saying. The interesting thing is we're talking a lot about natural disasters, power going out, that kind of stuff. Preparedness also can be related to things that are not natural disaster related. It can be related to losing a job. It can be related to somebody getting sick, a death in the family. It can be related to lots of things like that, which are not necessarily natural disasters, but will put a financial, emotional stress on the family or the individual and cause you to really just have to rely on what you've got in the bank, so to speak. I mean, that could be both literal and figurative. I have gone through 1 or 2 layoffs, and I've been fortunate enough to get a job relatively quickly right after it. But if I didn't, we would have to rely on savings that we had set aside. And we had fortunately been smart enough to get that set up early on. So what I'm getting at here is there's different levels of preparedness, there's different areas of preparedness. And I like to look at it from like a series of concentric rings. The inner one most being my family, my finances, my personal stuff. Are we able to handle a job loss? Are we able to handle a sickness or a death in the family? Are we able to handle the immediate things that happen on a fairly regular basis to people that are not these terrific catastrophes? Versus then the next level out would be something where the power goes off for a couple of days, or there's a storm and you can't get to work, or you can't get to the store. Can you last a couple of days? Then can you last a couple of weeks? I developed all this mindset because of sitting through Hurricane Sandy, right? We sat there and we knew this hurricane was coming, so we kind of did the whole bread and milk thing. Being the Italian household that we are, we had a bunch of pasta and stuff stored in the house. But we realized pretty quick that we didn't have an immediate way to cook anything, even just to boil water. We didn't have any means of extra food that wasn't long-term storage type stuff, besides like pasta and stuff like that. And we also realized very quickly that our security was less than stellar. Those were 3 areas that really kind of came to light. The cooking part, we were able to use both my camping stuff. Believe it or not, that actually helped out a lot in terms of being prepared, was just having a camping stove to help, and the grill outside. And then in terms of the food, we were able to scrape together enough until we could, until the stores opened back up and we were able to get out in 4 or 5 days. But from a security issue, that became an area that I was really concerned about, because after about a week of no power, the other big problem was gas. We were not getting, because bridges and stuff were closed down and people weren't traveling as much, and it was just a mess getting in and off, on and off the island. We weren't getting gas deliveries nearly as much, and the gas stations were running very low, and there was huge lines. So getting your car to a gas station that had gas was tough. Waiting in line was tough, and then there was people who were idiots and becoming violent about those lines. And then there was also, so the police were out monitoring those situations, and then there was other people cruising neighborhoods, because at that point everything was so dark you could see into the houses that were lit, and you could tell that people were casing neighborhoods, and it got a little scary at points, because you just saw cars slowly driving by. I had one instance where a car slowly drove by and I looked out and they had purposely blacked out the license plate so you couldn't even tell who it was, couldn't report it. And it's just those situations you realize, okay, I need to prep for both food, shelter, and protection. Long story of just why I prepare and kind of what I prepare for in kind of the near term.
Something you had discussed is, the way I define preparedness at its most basic level is to ensure that your family, yourself and your family, are ready for any circumstance. That's generally what it is in a nutshell. Yes, we did talk a lot about natural disasters, but coming back to your point, when it comes to losing a job, having a financial hardship, and we've all seen the statistic that 70% of Americans don't have $1,000 in their savings to cover an expense.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that same survey, that same study, is that 45% of Americans at that time, and this was 2019, had zero in their savings. They had no savings whatsoever. I'm sure it's worse now with inflation, with the post-COVID chaotic landscape in which we live, everything. So 45% of Americans, that's 1 in every 2 people essentially, have nothing in their savings account. If they lose a job, if something happens, if they have an accident, whatever that looks like, they don't even have the means to try to take care of their family. So what that means to me and what that suggests to me is that we as men have an incredible obligation to prepare our families for any circumstance. And that segues really well into how a man can get started when it comes to preparedness. So, I mean, I kind of want to kick it over to you in terms of things that you've done to get started or what you've done in the past.
It goes back to what I say all the time is start small. You talked about the savings accounts and the lack of savings that we're seeing right now. 100% you should have a small, even if it's just $1,000 saved. If the car goes and you can't get to work, you need new brakes, whatever it is, you need to be able to cover that. You need to be able to, if the water heater goes, make sure that your family has hot water and heat for the house. You need to be able to take care of the small things like that. Once that starts, it really is how far you want to go. But I start small, start with being able to manage a very small emergency. Brakes go in the car, somebody gets sick, needs to see a doctor, work up to I lose a job, or you go from the $1,000 to maybe saving up to as much as 3 to 6 months worth of savings in an account so that you can handle a long unemployment stretch. Now, it's a big jump there, but it's important to kind of see the bigger picture when you're starting small. And then on the other side of it is you can start to bank some food, depending on your circumstances, right? So I'm just going to pick a random place, people in Detroit maybe aren't going to see the natural disasters that the people on Long Island see. And I'm sure that you guys have a certain set of natural disasters that we don't see, that the people in Detroit won't see. So you have to kind of figure out where you're at and what natural disasters are affecting you the most or are prone to affecting you the most and work from there. For instance, my family now, we are able to get through 2 weeks with no opportunity to go to the store, no food. We have gas reserves for generators at this point, and we are able to protect ourselves. So we've built those up over the years. It wasn't just something where I went out and spent a lot of money. I had to prioritize which path was most important. And it really is shelter, food, protection to me. It was first make sure that the house as it stands, assuming there's no damage, can keep us relatively warm. And then let's make sure that we have food, and then let's make sure that we can protect all of that. So that was a general process that I followed.
I think for me, when it first came to that, it's kind of interesting. We'll get into this a little bit later, but I culturally am in a situation where we're strongly encouraged to be prepared. But getting married, I had nothing in terms of preparedness. I was just a regular single dude in his 20s who didn't care. Getting married to my wife, she's always been very focused on preparedness. And that always started with the small things. When it comes to non-perishable goods and food, go to the store, we'll go to Costco, and if we get one thing of peanut butter, we'll pick up a second one. And then we'll take that second one and we'll store it. If we get a bag of rice, we'll get a second bag of rice. Obviously within our means, we're not going to go hog wild. But every time we go to the store, if we need to get 2 or 3 of something, we'll generally get one more, an extra can of soup, a few extra things of ramen, whatever that looks like, so that we can slowly start to build a stockpile or a surplus, in other words. Like if I go and I need to buy some ammo for my guns, I'll go to the store, and if they have 100 rounds of 9mm, I'll buy 2 of those bricks, so I have 200 rounds. It's just a simple matter of, within our means, simply setting aside or spending a little extra money to buy a little more. Mm-hmm. When it comes to finances, make sure the biggest thing that most people who are prepared do is they set aside that money before it even hits their bank account. So if you have any sort of automated way to save your money, set aside 10%, 15%, whatever you can afford into your savings account as a rainy day fund. If you're not saving, you're living outside of your means. Even if you can only save a few dollars a week, it starts small. I think one thing that most people forget about when it comes to provisioning preparedness items is they forget about the basics. They forget about water. They forget about ways to be able to charge phones or have a radio signal. So it's buying one of those little handheld radios that can be one of those solar charged radios. Those cost $10 or $15 on Amazon. Getting radios like walkie-talkies. You can buy those for $20, $25 on Amazon. Most of the stuff doesn't necessarily cost a lot to get started. So it's simply just being intentional in setting aside whatever that looks like in your budget and then getting what you can and slowly building from there. Well, getting a 55-gallon drum to be able to put water in that to provide for your family might cost $50 or $60, but that's going to last you decades. So it's simply intentionality and then making a conscious effort every time you go to the store or every time you're doing something to think ahead just a little bit. Oh, this is on sale, so rather than getting 2 like I normally would, I'll get 3. That, to me, is the way to get started, is building it in and starting small, but foundationally making sure to set aside money every month within every paycheck to be able to get what you need from a preparedness perspective.
So the financial part of this is very important, right? Making sure that you're saving money, you've got a financial backstop, as well as you've got all the gizmos and gadgets. All of that is well and good, but there's a quote-unquote free part of this that you can also partake in, and that's the skills. You can have all the firearms, all the extra cooking stuff, all of the extra gear that you want. First aid especially, if you don't know how to use any of that stuff, it's useless material for you. At best, it's barter material. Learning how to utilize all these things. So, for instance, you talked about essentially what you were talking about is a concept called copy canning, where you buy one more of the thing that you've run out of for the week so that you just start to store it away. It's a great concept. We've used it here. It has definitely helped us build out a pantry of stuff that we'll actually use. So that's the first thing in building a pantry, is make sure it's stuff that you use. We found out, especially with, like you said, with twin 3-year-olds, if you're in a situation that's tough, you don't want them eating food that they're not comfortable eating. Now, you need stuff that stores well, but having something that you enjoy eating and that you eat on the regular will help you and help the others in your party be comfortable in that situation. But back to my point about skills, you need to be able to know how to cook. Let's say you have a fire pit in the backyard and you lose power and you've got electric oven stove. You need to learn how to cook on the fire pit. Can you make bacon and eggs for breakfast? Can you make a roast at dinner or whatever? Something.
You need to know how to start a fire.
You need to know how to start a fire. Yeah, that's a good first step. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, is the skill sets of stuff is just as important as the stuff itself. You talked about firearms. You have to be proficient with a firearm. Now, you don't have to be Jason Bourne with them, but you have to have good practical skills to back up all the equipment that you're buying.
The fact you mentioned bartering and self-protection, these are very crucial things. Being able to know how to start a fire, being able to know how to cook, being able to know how to purify water. These are very important skills that they're not necessarily hard to learn, but I will tell you, as we talked about, most people don't know how to do these things. Like, it's surprising to think how many men don't know how to start a fire. Like, if you need to cook, what are you going to do if you can't start a fire?
Simple things too, like you were talking about fire. We realized in our house, we're not smokers or anything. We realized we have one lighter in our house. Sounds trivial until you've got your only source of light is candles, and you're trying to light a fire in the backyard. And oh, by the way, the electric starter on the grill goes, and you don't have a long stick or something to light to start the propane on. Little things like that, but it's simple skills, simple stuff like that you need.
And can I tell you something? Yeah, it's cool if you can start a fire with flint and stone. All right, cool. Sure. Who cares? Really what it boils down to is you need to be able to do something consistently and easily, dependably.
Yes.
Have lighters in your house, right? Yeah, cool. You can start it with a magnifying glass in the sun. Cool. I mean, those skills might come in handy, but what's going to happen on a cloudy day? What's going to happen if that flint goes dull? Sometimes people try to overcomplicate things to try to sound like they're badass, when in reality they should back up and do it in the simplest way possible. Don't let your ego get in the way, because these are barterable skills. I mean, how much more useful is it going to be in time of crisis and you've got several lighters and you're able to barter one for a meal for your family or whatever that looks like?
Yeah. And
big picture.
Everyone wants to go immediately to like kind of the bushcraft, post-apocalyptic type thing. That's not going to happen for the most part. Listen, Unfortunately, we may see that someday, but it's probably not going to happen. You're probably just going to have a situation where you don't have power or utilities for 3 or 4 days. You don't have access to be able to go buy food or something like that. It's going to be that more basic stuff that happens more often. So you got to be able to handle the regular skills with normal tools. Yeah, you talked about earlier, entertaining twin 3-year-olds. That was a big part of getting through those 12 days was figuring out how to keep them entertained and feeling safe. We handled it like it was basically we were camping out in the house. So they loved it. We made like a little tent in their room and a bunch of blankets and that kind of stuff. And it worked out. It was fine. We did the whole wine bottles with candles kind of around the house in different areas and just kind of made it look like fun. But we also had to entertain ourselves, right? We're used to sitting down and watching a TV show or two at night. So we brought out board games. We brought out cards. We had books available. But what I'm getting at is it's those little things. It's those little things that make the comfort level important.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be in that, Walking Dead type scenario where you basically got to recreate civilization. That's not going to happen. You're going to be in a situation where some drunk driver hit the power line down the street and they can't get it fixed for 3 days, or the snow is so deep that you can't even get plowed out for a couple days. That's more apt to happen than the craziness that you see on TV.
That doesn't mean you shouldn't prepare for some of the craziness. Like, I think it's vital, as you had mentioned earlier, that men have firearm training. You know how to use your handgun. You know how to protect your family in a pinch. It's also very vital that you can have some form of close quarters combat skills. Whether that's jiu-jitsu, wrestling, boxing, whatever that looks like, you should know how to be able to take down a threat if needed within close quarters, also by using a firearm. Like, these are very important things to be able to protect your family.
Yeah, that was during, especially the last 3 or 4 days without power, that was my biggest fear, is that we were going to have a break-in at night, and I was going to have to handle that somehow. Because people were getting edgy and people were getting nervous. And, we're even seeing it now with gas prices the way they are and with just the economy kind of the way it is right now. There has been a rash of break-ins at night in my neighborhood. And what they're doing right now is it's relatively benign. They're walking around, they're trying car doors. And the car doors that are open, they're just going in, seeing what they can grab and walking away. Not the end of the world. Maybe they grab some change out of your dashboard or a set of headphones or something that you left in there. Not too bad, but that type of stuff can escalate pretty quick. Yeah. And if you happen to catch that person doing that, what does that look like in terms of protection for yourself and your family? What's interesting here is that we're starting to do what one of our tips is don't go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I picture this as like a spider web. You've got kind of the inside area where your biggest concern is, and then there's all these paths and tentacles that go out from there, and it's very easy to kind of get lost down each one of them. When you're preparing for something, you have to be very crystal clear about what you're preparing for, what that looks like for you, and what that's going to take in terms of provisions and skills, and stick to that.
We use the term intentionality a lot. Be intentional in terms of what you're looking to accomplish, and think of the lowest common denominator. Identify what you need to work on and how you can get there quickly. Yeah, there are a million things you can do. It gets really exciting when we start talking about deadly skills and hand-to-hand combat and being able to homestead purely on solar, completely off the grid. That stuff can sound really exciting, and you can absolutely go down that rabbit hole and spend tons of time and even tons of money preparing yourself for that. In reality, what's the likelihood of all of that stuff coming to light? It's probably pretty low. So you've got to think, what is the most likely crisis that could potentially happen where I live, coming back to what you said earlier, what are the natural disasters that could hit, preparing financially, and getting in place to be able to handle that. Starting with a good benchmark is 14 days. How can you take care of your family for 2 weeks and then growing from there? Yeah, it's not as fun, but it's way more practical, and that is what's going to matter when your family needs it.
Yeah, it's very sexy to think about, okay, I'm gonna fortify the house and be able to protect us from each angle and all this stuff. It's a lot less sexy to say, okay, I got a family of 5. I need to make sure that we can eat for the next 14 days and drink and wash ourselves. That's a big one that people forget about, right, is the water component of this. But in general, back to the topic, it's the unsexy stuff that really makes the difference in terms of making sure that you're prepared and making sure that you're ready for the natural disasters or the catastrophes that are going to be most prevalent in your situation.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll tell you, one of the easiest things that we did in terms of being prepared for the things that are most common for us. So where I live, like I mentioned, we deal with hurricanes. For some reason or another, they do not bury utility lines around me. So we end up losing power all the time once storm season rolls in. It's ridiculous. And they also run the lines in our backyard, so it's a pain in the butt to get to the lines rather than if they were on the streets. I don't know why, but regardless, we lose power a lot. One of the easiest things we did to be prepared is we made what we call blackout kits. And it is literally just a little Tupperware container that we make for most of the rooms in the house. And it's got a candle, a lighter, a flashlight, batteries separate so that they don't corrode inside the flashlight. I think I threw a headlamp in there with batteries as well, and a glow stick. Glow stick was more for like the kids when they were little, just to have something fun while we were looking around. But what that does, very simply, is power goes out, it's the middle of the night. In each room, you know that you can go to the specific area, grab this little kit. Now you've got light. This allows, if it's me, I can grab the headlamp, walk down to the fuse box, see what's going on, see if it's just something in the house, or I can figure out if it's the neighborhood or not. It gives the kids a little bit of light. It's amazing what just a burning candle can do in terms of warmth and a feeling of security and protection. But those are the little things that you can do that are very centric to the most probable catastrophe that you're going to experience that'll make the biggest difference.
And I think one thing that is very important that we haven't necessarily gotten into yet is we've talked a lot about the idea of needing to hunker down in your house. Sometimes that's not an option. Sometimes you have to get out.
Yep.
And so it's really important to also have a bug out bag that's readily available. It has some bivy bags in it. It has some provisions, some food, some various things like that, headlamps, whatever that looks like. There are any number of ways you can put those together, but that in an emergency, you've got it ready to go, whether that's already in your car, or what we do is we actually have kind of a bivy, like a bug out tote that is sitting in our closet right by our garage. So we simply pull it out, throw it on the back of my wife's car, and we can go. Because there are times that we haven't gotten into this. There are times where you've got to get out, whether that's an earthquake, for example, and your house is compromised, or whatever that looks like. That again, we're not trying to rabbit hole this, but it is another consideration that we haven't necessarily addressed as of yet. What can you do to be prepared if you need to leave?
And I'll double down on that bug out bag idea that you got. I've got friends who have had situations where their kids get very sick and they end up in the hospital. They've used their bug out bags as basically a suitcase because it's got an extra set of clothes, it's got some toothbrush, toothpaste, that kind of stuff, just basic necessities for an overnight stay. They've grabbed that bug out bag rather than having to think about putting together a suitcase worth of clothes so that they could be with their kids overnight in the hospital. It's not the kind of situation that you typically think of when you're putting together a kit like that, but it works incredibly well for those realistic catastrophes where somebody gets sick, somebody ends up in the hospital, you have to make a quick trip overnight immediately leave for whatever reason. Even if somebody's sick out of town and you got to go visit them, those bags are not just for the post-apocalyptic craziness that we sometimes see on TV or read about. They're very real and very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you really wanted to, if you didn't know what to put into a bug out bag, they sell pre-made bug out bags all over the place. It's really vital to have something at the ready so that you're prepared both to bunker down or to get out if needed. It's really just going to come down to coming back to that idea of what's the lowest common denominator. What could potentially happen? I need to be prepared for any potential scenario that could potentially happen.
Yep. Yeah, the prepackaged stuff is great, right? Prepackaged bug out bags, prepackaged first aid kits. They're great. The one thing I would caution people on is if you can put your own kits together, because then you know what's in there. You theoretically know how to use what's in there because you're not putting in something that you don't know how to use. I mean, I've bought first aid kits that have, suture kits and stuff like that. And it's like, all right, I mean, somebody needs to get sewn up. I'll give it a shot, but I got no idea how to actually do that.
Yeah, a lot of times they fill them with just useless crap.
Yeah, if you build your own, you've got a better sense of confidence that you can use what's in there. But in a pinch, if you need something, yeah, the prepackaged stuff is great.
Yeah, and and a bug out bag is really easy to get started. Most men probably already have a huge portion of what they need in one.
Yeah.
Already.
And again,
flashlights, pocket knives,
right. Make it realistic to your situation. I live on, like I mentioned before, I live on Long Island. I'm not going to be running to the woods, so I don't need an axe and a saw and my bow and stuff like that in my bug out bag. I need to be able to get to a hotel or get to somebody's house and deal with it there. So it's all realistic about what you're going to do. The one thing I might actually need in a bug out bag is a friggin' rubber boat to get off the island, but that's another story. That's other stuff to think about too. Is escape routes. Is bug out routes. How are you going to go where you go, or where are you going to go, and how are you going to get there? Maybe have a couple of extra routes planned to get to the same place.
That's a huge consideration, because you look at your situation where you have very few options to get off Long Island. I'm out here in Utah where I've got, if I can get outside of the Salt Lake Valley, I've got swaths of open land to do whatever I need to, and they're fairly accessible. So it's a consideration. You have to look at where you are as well. We've talked about that. That's a very important thing. What you're going to do to prepare on Long Island is considerably different than what I'm doing here. Yeah, Absolutely. There's some overlap, but that's why it comes to what do you need to do to tailor make your particular situation.
And then finally, one of the most important points to all of this, though, is to make sure that you are comfortable with leading your family and being that rock that they're going to rely on. When these situations occur, I know it happened with Hurricane Sandy. I'm sure you've been in situations as well. It's happened even in stuff as simple, I'll put that in quotes, as simple as when I've come home and had to tell my wife I lost a job due to the layoffs, is as men, we need to be that rock that leads. We need to be able to take emotion out of the situation as much as possible, take a step back, make good, sound decisions, and lead our families, lead our communities in a safe direction.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. That leadership component is so vital, because what's going to happen, a big part of preparedness that we haven't necessarily gotten into, but that is so vital, is that we are prepared mentally. When crisis hits, when disaster hits, when hard times hit, there's so many people who are not going to be prepared mentally for all that entails. If you can lead, people are going to trust you, follow you, believe you. That starts with your family. When crisis hits, your wife might be frazzled, your kids might be freaked out, but you need to be that calm rock that they can rely on, no matter what. They need to know that they can rely and depend on you. And that oftentimes happens within a community as well. When crisis hits, the community might melt down. People are going to look to you. I have a very unique perspective in that I'm a member of the LDS Church, and we're really big on preparedness. So when it comes to community, I think that we're probably more prepared than most, generally speaking. But at the same time, that does mean that men as leaders have to be willing and comfortable to step up in those moments. You have to do that. There are no ifs, ands, or buts. You have to be prepared mentally as well as physically, in relation to provisions, all of that.
What does that look like to you? And what I mean by that question is, what does leadership in these situations, effective leadership in these situations, look like to you?
To me, effective leadership in these situations comes down to one thing. You cannot let your emotions get in the way. Yeah, you might be scared. Yeah, you might be worked up. Yeah, you might be nervous, whatever that looks like. You have to be pragmatic and disciplined enough to push past that and to simply stoically lead. You have to set your emotion aside. That to me is what it boils down to. I know that that's much easier said than done, but in those moments, people are going to look to you to be able to make sound decisions where emotion doesn't get in the way. If emotion gets in the way, it can be the difference between life and death. Simply put, lizard brain, reptile brain, whatever you want to call it. In those moments of chaos, your emotions are going to tell you either fight or flight. You have to be disciplined enough to push past that, understand the situation, assess, and act. I don't know what you think, but
no, that's a great way of putting it. It's definitely removing the emotion from the situation, which, to your point, can be very difficult, especially if you do not do that on a regular basis in your life. And I would argue that most of us don't have to. We don't live in high stress situations on the regular. We don't live in situations where a wrong decision may mean the difference between somebody becoming injured or sick or worse. And we need to do that. I think that's also, we talked a couple of weeks ago about why it's important to go outside and the mental aspect and the challenge of it. You can learn a lot from spending a weekend in the woods backpacking and kind of putting yourself in these temporary, I don't want to say fake, but man-made, semi-controlled situations where you still have to make decisions about that have more consequence than your typical day-to-day. And I think that ties in well to that mindset of putting yourself regularly in difficult situations is a way to prepare for the times when shit hits the fan and you need to be that stoic, strong leader that your family and your community needs.
Absolutely. Doing hard things, doing uncomfortable things prepares your mind. Simply put, sitting down on the couch, watching a show, playing Xbox, eating bonbons, those things are nice, but they're not difficult. Doing difficult things, regardless of what that looks like, spending time out in the woods, going to the gym. Yes, I know we brought going to the gym into this, but you're doing something hard. That calluses your mind, going to a David Goggins term. As you callous your mind, you grow more and more resilient so that when times get difficult, you know that you've got it. You're prepared. Challenge yourself.
The other thing that helps with is you'll find in tough situations that time seems to speed up and it feels like you're getting hit with things left and right, one right after another. The more you callous your mind and the more you get used to being in tough situations, the more you allow yourself to slow down time and to realize that there is enough time to take in all the inputs and make the correct decision, as opposed to just having to immediately react to everything. And the more hard things you do, the better you get at that.
I'm drawn to the idea of, it comes from the Navy SEALs, of slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you use that intentionality and deliberation initially, right? Like, you're very thorough and comprehensive so that when the moment hits, you can perform as needed. Yeah, they're talking about being able to do things quickly, but I think the same thing applies to your mind.
So those are all great points. Before we leave, Brett, I want to just jump in and have you spend maybe a few minutes talking about, you've alluded to it a couple times now, but your church and their views on preparedness and maybe why that's a part of your faith and what you guys do particularly that it is involved in that.
So, as we've talked about a few times, I am a member of the LDS Church, the Mormons, if you will, and a lot of people know us for several reasons. One of those happens to be food storage and preparedness. And just as a little bit of a backstory as to the why behind why your Mormon neighbors are really focused on food storage and preparedness, it goes back to our history. In the mid-1800s, as the Mormon Church was founded in New York, and then obviously it ended up in Utah. So the question is, why? How did that happen? They were persecuted. They were essentially kicked out of various cities. They were kicked out of city in Missouri, city in Illinois, and they were essentially forced west. And it was a time of a lot of hardship. You hear stories of some of the pioneers of our church crossing these plains, having their children die of starvation, die of sicknesses that were a lot more common back then, like consumption and malaria and whatever else. And it was a people that they were able to quickly build cities, and then those cities were they were kicked out of these cities. Sometimes people were destroyed, people were jailed. So with that, it built a lot of resolve and resiliency within the people that's kind of persisted to this day. And once they got to Utah, they settled, kind of got everything off the ground. At the time, the Salt Lake Valley was, it's the Great Basin. It was very dry. There was nothing here. They cultivated and created just a beautiful place. It's a pretty great place to live. And they did that through a lot of resiliency, hard work, determination, but that came from their previous experiences. So the message from that time has always been, we need to be prepared for any circumstances that come our way. We need to have the provisions in place to be able to take care of our families. So because of that, the church has had a very large stance on food storage. We have various locations throughout the country where we produce food storage. for people. If they're able to be able to buy, cans of potatoes, cans of beans, various things like that people can get. And a large message in our doctrine is that we need to be prepared. That starts with food, right? Because we need to be able to take care of our families if a crisis hits, but extends beyond that. We have a very strong take on financial independence, being able to take care of ourselves financially. And that extends to being able to be in situations where if the worst were to happen, we're prepared. And if you think big picture, this comes to like the book of Revelation. Most people believe that at some point Christ's second coming will happen. And if you believe what's talked about in Revelation, there are going to be some dark times ahead. And, we can kind of see the writing on the wall with some of the things that are going on in the world now, with obviously the stuff going on with Ukraine, the inflation risks we're running into. People are in uncomfortable situations. And the belief is that theoretically things could get worse prior to Christ's return, so that we have to be prepared under any circumstance to take care of our family. So that's the basis of what that is. And I think for us, it's interesting because it is such a core part of our doctrine, in that we grew up thinking, I need to worry about food storage. Any one of my friends growing up here in Utah that was a member of the church, I knew if I went to their house, they would have food storage in some capacity. They would have a basement with provisions. This has always been part culturally of who we are. So it's interesting because I think we as a people are much more prepared to handle these situations simply because we saw hardship in the past. I think that's what differentiates our philosophy and our ideology from that of a lot of other people, is that we're coming at this from a place of past hardship and adversity rather than from a place of comfort. So we've been taught by our leaders that we simply just need to be prepared, because who knows if those situations will return.
Well, I appreciate that. It's always interesting to me. Obviously I'm not part of your church, your faith. It's always interesting to me to hear the differences that we have, even though we tend to espouse similar beliefs. And it's interesting to me how one section of your history has created such a big part of who you are collectively as a group. I think it's really interesting. And personally, on a personal note, I think a lot of people could take a lot from that mentality. It's not, what's interesting is the preparedness is not necessarily a religious aspect of your church. It's just based upon history and based upon experiences that you've had. Experiences that we could all theoretically have.
Yeah.
And we can take that part and go. I also think it's cool that as a group or as a church, you share that. For instance, I was looking into learning how to can stuff years ago, and one of the biggest places to look was the Mormon Church and some of the online certifications and courses that they had.
Yep.
And that was available just to teach people a simple, relatively simple thing such as canning. So I think it's great that you guys share that knowledge and make it part of your, I don't know what the word, protocol in terms of life. So it's cool. Thank you.
Yeah. No, for sure.
So as always, man, it was a great call, great conversation. What I'm going to do is I'll add a couple of links to places where guys can jump online and learn more about general preparedness information, general preparedness, thought, mindset, that kind of thing. We'll put those in the show notes. As always, you can find those show notes at untamingmasculinity.com. There you'll find not only the show notes for this episode, but all of our other episodes, as well as links to our social media. We highly encourage you to jump on social media and interact with us. We want to know what you're doing to be prepared, where you're falling down, how we can help you, get more prepared. In general, we want to just interact with you on social media. That helps us. It helps us get a bigger audience, get seen by more men, and help more men. Also, the other thing that we ask is that you jump on your podcast player, give us a 5-star rating and review. That also helps get the word out to other men and helps us spread the word of untaming their masculinity. So, once again, Brad, thank you very much. As always, it was a good call. And we want to make sure that you guys come back next week. Until then, we leave you with just one question. What are you doing to untame your masculinity?